Thank you so much, and we appreciate your service on our board and your being here and sharing your expertise. I am at home now with my 5 kids and enjoying that time, but before I left to take time with my children, I taught in New Jersey in their public school system for 14 years. And it was during that time that I met Patrick and began to understand better the struggles that we were having as a nation with mental health, and started to see reflected in my work at school how mental health challenges were presenting themselves, that I had never been able to identify that before. I had always felt that stress. I had seen that trauma in my students and didn't make the connection of what was happening. I was very clearly, focused on discipline, focused on the challenges of the students and on the academic work, but didn't see the underlying cause because I hadn't ever had it presented in that way. So although I felt I received a great education and teacher training, had great mentors in my school, because I had not made that association, it wasn't until I married one of the leading advocates for mental health that then I said, oh yeah, okay, now this makes sense. I see what's happening here. So it took a little. But in doing so and in seeing that connection, it's very clear to me now, years into this, that there's still a lot of work to do. So as we're all kind of waking up to this need in the country, I can see the potential, which we're so excited to have this great panel here, and I can see how we have begun to focus on the needs of our students, which is terrific. And in that process, we cannot forget the needs of those people that are working with our students, both teachers and coaches and administrators, school nurses, who are feeling the stress, the trauma, the drain. And we all have heard many times about teacher burnout and what could we be doing to help lessen that burden or to empower teachers. Because when it is a constant, year after year, students cycling through that have challenges that within one school term you cannot help them resolve, you can feel very defeated. And I'm so grateful that we can share some of your experience, and maybe we could start with Marc. You could tell us a little bit about what you're working on, your new book that's coming out, and just a little background for us.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I guess I should ask you how you're feeling. You think I'm kidding. You may talk more about feelings in the next hour than you have in your whole life. So my day job is I'm a professor at the Child Studies Center at Yale University, and I founded a center called the Center for Emotional Intelligence. We are a team of 50 people who are scientists and practitioners who run around the world training people and getting to think more about how they feel, but more importantly, maybe what they do with their feelings. I'm also, I have 2 other roles. One is I'm on the board of directors of CASEL, which is based here in Chicago. It's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And my last role is I am the lead developer of a SEL approach called Ruler that is now in about 2,400 schools across the nation and in other countries. And I'll share more about that as we go on.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Bay, and I have traveled here from Seattle, Washington, actually Bremerton, but I say Seattle because a lot of people don't know that there's anything west of Seattle. I have a couple hats. So the first hat that I have is I work at the Bremerton School District, and I've worked there for 18 years as a teacher. The last several years, I've worked in the district office as a coordinator for assessment and instruction. And very near and dear to my heart is making sure that both our children are ready and able to learn, but also emotionally and behaviorally ready to learn. And so I work with coaches and principals and teachers with those initiatives. And so it's a Title I district, and so there's a lot of poverty going around in there. And so we just make sure that we have the health, wellness, and the learning for everyone. I have another role. I am the past president of National PTA. I stepped down 2 years ago and turned over the reins to someone else. And so now I have time to both work back in my state with PTAs across the country and also at a national level as the immediate past president. And so our whole child initiative, not just around what's going on in schools, but in communities, around families and wellness and students and learning is very important to me. I also serve on the board of Mental Health America, which is a new role for me in the last year, and it's part of my passion because as a teacher, I saw the needs of our students and the wellness of our students, both from a mental health perspective and a physical perspective, and also in the capabilities of a blended model. And so I do those types of things. I'm also a mother of 3 children, one of them who is 31 right now and suffers from bipolar disorder. And so as I walk the path, I find the nexus of all of these intersecting. And so I'm here today to just talk about how we take care of ourselves, how we walk the journey, and how we make sure that in the workplace, where your workplace is, which is a school building for me, how we make sure we take our care of ourselves. We are in some ways first responders in a lot of ways because the kids that come into our classroom and the parents and our community, we're right there with those kids every day.
Thank you. Jared?
Good morning. I'll answer your question, Mark. I am extraordinarily excited to be here. The innovation, the thinking of the Kennedy Center, the forum to have this topic, and for all of you to be part of this is my dream. I have the great privilege of being able to support what I consider the most important professionals on the planet. And I'm a psychologist. And through the work at Teacher Coach, we blend personal growth and professional development so that we can support educators inside and outside the classroom, because we know that educators give of themselves well beyond the course of the school day. I'll make it very brief because we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, thanks. So we're here today and we're talking about workplace mental health. And of course, as we're thinking about, today we'll hear from unions. I was a member of the NEA. We'll hear about unions and how our health plans can play a role in that. So which we hear very often about the unions striking for higher wages, striking for maintaining their benefits, and are their benefits covering their mental health needs as a part of that? But I think what we're not hearing about is other ways that our teachers could be supported. So the NEA, the AFT may not be talking about that, and the parents may not know the impact that teacher stress is having on their students. How is it, maybe you could talk a little on this, Marc, that the stress that a teacher brings into the classroom can impact their students, and what does your ruler program do?
Sure. Let me just start off with a little bit of research that I've done over the last couple of years. So 5 years ago, we did a national study with 45,000 high school students, and we asked them a simple question: tell us, how do you feel as a student in your school? These were public, private, charter schools, high and low SES, very diverse. And what we found was that 80% of the feelings that children use to describe their emotional lives were negative. The top 3, tired, bored, and stressed. We went to the next phase and we said, what about the teachers who are in the classrooms with these students? So with support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we did a study of 6,000 teachers across the United States. And we asked them the same questions plus many other things. And what we found was a number of things. One, the climate of the schools that they work in were the single strongest predictor of their negative emotional states. But more on top of that are the outcomes. So what we found was that teachers who are experiencing the most negative emotions, which, by the way, their top emotions were overwhelmed, frustrated, and stressed. The top emotion that a teacher tells us they're feeling in America is frustration. The outcomes, I think, are more important. We found they had greater burnout, greater anxiety and depression, greater sleep troubles, and they even had higher body mass indexes because we collected real biological and health data. So with that said, the question is, does how a teacher feels matter? And the answer is yes, just like how a parent feels matters for raising their child. We, in psychology, talk about emotional contagion. So how I feel right now is driving much of your emotional state. So if I stood up here and was like, that's a terrible question, right? Really? That's what you're going to ask me? All of a sudden, you hate me, and everyone else is turned off. In a millisecond. Think about that. Just by my facial expression, my vocal tone, and what I say, in a millisecond, your brain has said, I'm out of here. And what we say is that emotions are signals to approach or to avoid. And the question is, how much training do our teachers have in generating approach-oriented emotions while teaching? I can go on and on about this, but we'll continue and then go on.
No, it is upsetting to hear that the top 3 emotions are negative.
Top 3 are negative, 80% of the words. We ask them in your own words to describe your emotional life. Mm-hmm. Not even using surveys, we use surveys too. But the top 3 were frustrated, overwhelmed, and stressed. And then when we aggregate their scores and use them to predict things like burnout, intentions to leave the profession, etc. I will say one last thing before I allow my colleagues to share, is what we found in this study was something quite interesting, that if the principals of the schools that the teachers were working in had high emotional intelligence, those were reduced by 50%. So literally, the leaders of our nation's schools are influencing the emotional lives of our teachers, and in turn, the health and well-being and the success of our kids.
That's a great point. And, I think in many of our schools, including the one I taught in, the administrator turnover is just as high. And so we can focus on teacher burnout, but I had 7 principals in 14 years while I was there, and that's going to play a part in school culture. Maybe you could talk a little bit more, Laura, about why you think it is teachers are feeling such stress.
Well, I think there are many reasons why teachers feel more stress, and part of it is you carry the weight of trying to make sure that when those students walk into your classroom for that year or the 2 years, that you give everything you can to make sure they're academically, socially, and behaviorally ready to walk into the next grade. And I teach in a Title I district, and so a lot of our kids come with poverty, homelessness, job insecurities on the part of the parents, drug issues, which come along the way. And so we also have the affluent community that is part of our school. So as a teacher, you are trying to make sure that you move those kids on all of those fronts. And if you come to it as approach, he said, with burnout, frustration, and I'm going to say hopelessness, you didn't say, but hopelessness, that is how you start your day as a teacher. You don't reach those kids because you are dealing with your own issues, both primary and secondary trauma, and you're trying to move the kids forward. You need to be positive. Our district 2 years ago adopted 2 initiatives. One is about the academics and where we need to move students, but the one that we spend as much time with is the social-emotional piece. And so we've embarked on we're in our 2nd year. It's an ongoing initiative where we're developing the social-emotional resilience of our students and our staff, I don't want to say teachers, of our staff at the same time, and trying to do it in a cohesive way where no one is left out. And so that, as you can imagine, that would be really hard to do, right? But even acknowledging that the 2 initiatives, it's the social-emotional part of where we are today in our district and meeting the needs of both of our teachers, our teaching staff, our principals, our district, and our students, and then being able to meet the needs of the parents parents because you're interacting with the parents and they have their whole bucket coming in, right? We try to make sure that we offer hope, healthiness, and awareness for our teachers, our teaching staff, and our principals collaboratively and deliberately as we move it forward, so that we, as caregivers, as teachers, as providers, can then come with a positive look forward on what we're doing, a hopefulness, an ability to say we're going to start the day in a positive way, not bring in what's happened at home, because we all have our home lives and are dealing with our own social emotional well-being. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to make sure that we're doing, so that we can make sure that we are healthy as first providers, as that first contact with those students, so that we can create not that hopelessness in our environment, but hopefulness as we move forward. So it's a tricky walk. Are we really good at it? No. But because we're working at it and we're deliberate about how we do it, then we're able to move both the teaching staff, the support staff, the leadership staff, and we can create that environment where we at least recognize that we need to go that way.
So recognizing it. I wonder, how aware many districts and staff are that this is the direction we need to move in, and the impact. I think, back to when in my own district we had somebody who was pretty progressive in their thinking, brought in, yoga instructor they got grant money to do yoga and Zumba and a fitness. We all thought, that was kind of fun. How'd she get money for that, right? And not seeing the bigger picture and what that connection was. We didn't have a plan, and this was part of the plan, and here is why we're doing this. We didn't see that as a staff and what we were building towards. It was just, oh, did you know that they're having a free Zumba thing as part of our in-service? Okay, that's weird. I didn't bring my sneakers. It was more this, not the knowledge of why we need to do this. And so have we been able to put that message out? How do we get that out there? And, are people responding? Because I think there's a lot of awareness that has to happen just for the general public. And to move that into our school system is a whole nother piece. Could you maybe talk with teacher coach about how you're doing that and what the training would look like?
It's helpful to understand how I conceptualize the issues. So when I think about the importance of addressing teacher wellness, I don't see any other issue that we're facing in education. I don't know that we have the ability to solve that until we address this, whether it's the fact that a student drops out of school every 25 seconds, the climbing rates of suicide, the school violence, academics. Nothing is nearly as pivotal as the frontline first responders who are addressing this issue. And as you said, Amy, the awareness is rising. I've got research as well. It's not nearly as impressive as Marc, so I'm going to intertwine mine with national research so you don't know which is which, so they sound equally impressive. There's a Gallup poll that shows 90% of the teachers in this country being actively disengaged or not engaged in their work. Astounding, 90%. How do we get anything accomplished in education? In my own research, I have 95% of teachers saying that burnout is a real risk. Over 86% saying that moderate to high levels of stress on a daily basis. So when you ask how to increase their awareness, they know that they're not being tended to. They know that their emotional and psychological needs are not at the forefront. There's not a school district in the country that I know of that has in their mission or vision statement, let's help our workforce be happier and healthier. But we develop lots of tools and strategies for the children. which is understandable, but in this outcome-focused mentality, because we're moving away from process. It's all about outcomes now, because we want greater accountability, which is terrific. But if we don't pay attention to the processes, the ways in which people feel good about their work, the ways in which they feel invested, the ways in which they feel like they can make a difference, then none of that matters. So our work to generate awareness is to capitalize on what people are already knowing and feeling and to incorporate them into the process so that they don't feel like it's just one more project that's about the children. Everything that they do has to be embodied. If we're going to teach them about social emotional learning as you're talking about, well, that can be integrated into wellness. Because if we're truly going to expect educators to help with the critical work of helping with the behavioral and health of our students, we have to attend to them equally.
Marc, maybe you could talk a little about teacher resiliency. I've heard, we talk about grit and resiliency for students, so maybe some
Both
teaching.
terms that I have trouble with.
Okay.
I think one of the challenges that we face with social emotional learning is that we don't take it as seriously as we do academics. I'm of the type that says academics are an outcome, but so is social emotional learning an outcome. It's not just a process, but it's something we need to look for in terms of outcomes as well. As someone who hires people all the time, as someone who participates in research in the workplace, people want to be around people who have social and emotional skills. Think about someone you work with who is emotionally dysregulated. And how many of you say to yourself, oh my goodness, I'd like to work with them for the rest of my life. No, you just want to get away from people who have difficulty dealing with their inner life and their external regulation. So I just think it's important to know that. The other thing in terms of what we know from social emotional learning is that it's not something that's done. When I was in first grade or so, I learned that 5 minus 3 equals 2. This morning when I went for a cup of coffee, I got my Americano. It was $4. I gave a $5 bill. I got $1 back. I will learn that. I learned that. I will know that for the rest of my life. Dealing with my inner life has been much more complicated. So there are days I'm standing in the line at the coffee shop and the barista is going too slow and I want to rip that person's head off, right? There are days that I feel just like the world, I've got the world on a string, and then anything that happens at home, nothing bothers me. And then there are other nights where my partner, my mother-in-law, moves the salt, and I'm like, that was interesting, right? Right? And I'm activated, and I say something unkind, and I want to regulate, but I can't. And I just tell you this because we give short shrift to the development of social and emotional skills. These are skills that, it's not a workshop, it's not a program, it's something that has to be continuously worked on from preschool till now, I'm going to be 50, to teachers. It's not like the workshop on, here's the strategy to regulate. Mm-hmm. And that's what kind of makes me crazy a little bit about the yoga workshop or the Zumba. Mm-hmm. How many people went to Zumba? Right? Out of 500 staff, 3, 4, 10? Yeah. Because there's not one strategy that works for all people. It's the same thing for mindfulness. It's the biggest thing now. Mindfulness does not work for everybody, but we try to prescribe one, size-fits-all approaches to people. I'll stop there.
No, I taught history, but I liked teaching social studies because then I could, it broadened what I felt like I could incorporate into my classroom. And we spent so much time in a teacher, college programs learning about curriculum and how to develop and implement the curriculum. And so lacking is that social emotional piece. And it is, even in the part where you talked about what is the approach that we're putting forward that people will respond to, we know frequently, how to grab people's attention, and that we need a question in the beginning and a few things to grab their attention, but not to help with the regulation of student behaviors in the classroom, or how to get everybody even on that page where they're ready to receive.
Well, there's a few things. One is, the way we think about it with our approach is that there's 4 kind of pillars to this work. The first is the mindsets. Right. I'll tell you right now that as people fill out these surveys and they say they're interested, but deep inside, people's mindsets around this are not as positive as you might think. People are afraid to talk about their feelings. It just is the way it is. I teach undergraduates who've come from all kinds of, even the top, schools, and they say things to me like, Professor Brackett, I didn't need emotional intelligence to get into Yale. And I'm like, well, you're going to need it to get out.
Yeah.
So just putting that right there. And so it's like, how do we get them to have that belief that, that their academic abilities are not the only thing that's important? The second is they have to learn the skills, and I could spend all day talking about that. The third, though, is that you have to be in an environment. So when I was a kid who hated school in New Jersey, bullied horrifically, had anxiety disorders, eating disorders, you name it, my parents, who didn't know what to do, did one thing, that they put me in therapy. But every day went back to the toxic environment. So the therapy didn't have any impact on me because I'm dropped back into a classroom where kids were still bullying me, where teachers were not paying attention to how I felt. And then the fourth piece are these policies, and the procedures. If your behavior management policy in your school doesn't support restorative practices or the teaching of skills, then you're just not building a system that is actually caring about the child.
And that's part of the work that we're trying to do, and I'm going to talk about in Bremerton. But I see around the country, around educators, it's not as strong as it needs to be, it's not as robust, but it's talking about how do we take care of ourselves as first responders. Teachers are first responders. How do we take care of ourselves so that we can take that time in the classroom, A, to develop relationships, to develop a safe environment to learn. All of those things have to happen before you can, and I don't want to say teach, but before you as a classroom can become a learning environment. And so one of the things we did with our initiative, and it's throughout the state of Washington, and I know there's many districts that are doing the same thing, is talking about the cell implementation to help access the academic implementation and learning that's going on in the classrooms, and that's very, very important. And so as first responders, if you believe teachers are first responders, as first responders, you have to take care of both yourself, you have to take care of yourself so that you can be open to listening and recognizing what's going on with your students. And then you can build the community of learners, because if, as a teacher, I am in a spot where I am frustrated, angry, overwhelmed, not ready, then that doesn't happen in the classroom. And so the CELL initiative isn't about putting supports in for just students or for just teachers or for just principals. It's creating a community where you understand that the students come with their readiness for social emotional regulation. Teachers come with their readiness, and that together we have to work with that, and that what's going on in the home and with the parents is also contributing to that. And so the power of what all of us try to do as educators, as teachers, as first responders, is that social-emotional learning that comes first, and that regulation and the understanding of where you are. And some days will be a lot better for me, and some days will be a lot worse. But how do we build a system so that we can take care of ourselves and take care of our students? And I think that's what you were alluding to, because it becomes very hard when you're with students for 7.5 hours a day, and they're coming with their needs and not being able to express where they are on that social emotional ladder that day, and you have to recognize it. So what are our routines at the door? What are our routines for students at the door, and what are our routines for staff at the door? Because you need to have staff routines as much as you have that classroom routine to greet each of the kids as they walk in. So that's part of the work we're doing in Washington State, in Bremerton. I also work with the National PTA, and that's what we're working with parents, that whole child type of activity, and recognizing where parents and the family life and the teacher's family life all fit together. And I think I'll just stop with that piece right there.
Yeah.
I can keep going?
Yeah, sure.
I refer to SEL as PSEL because I think of it as psychosocial emotional learning. And there are a number of elements of PSEL that I don't ordinarily see included in the work. Marc talked about self-regulation. Many teachers would have a difficult time differentiating between self-control and self-regulation. How do you know when a child is being impulsive or not necessarily holding back versus when it's being driven by something deeper? How do we teach kids to move from conflict resolution to constructive differencing? Differences are the essence of all intimacy. We get close with people because of our differences. That doesn't necessarily get taught in schools. We subgroup and we have cliques and we affiliate with those people who we're comfortable with. And that enhances our polarization. How do we help kids, which I consider to be the most critical of all the PSELs, which is tolerance for distress? If we have a low threshold for discomfort, we're going to react quicker, we're going to be more prone to substance use, we're going to be less self-reflective, we're going to be less able to look at our inequities and our frailties. So helping a child raise their tolerance for distress is done by helping do the same for teachers. And how do you do that for teachers when they feel like the system isn't working for them? And that's a lot of the work that we're doing at Teacher Coach, is by helping educators raise their own tolerance for distress, helping them look at etiology of behavior. If a child's misbehaving, what are the driving forces for that behavior? What needs aren't being met? There's no behavior without a need that's either being threatened or perceived to be threatened. And if we can teach them to become self-reflective practitioners, people who look at themselves and know their own stuff, if I was in New York, I might say something different, then we'll have a better chance of being able to help them see themselves in relation to others, which to me is the real key in wellness.
I was able to, when I had a greater understanding, my empathy and compassion for my students completely changed, because it's so easy as an educator to get frustrated with challenging behaviors in your classroom. And as soon as you shift your mindset or the way that you view your students and the driving factors behind that behavior, then all of a sudden you can feel compassionate. And not only that, you can also want to find help for them, versus discipline. And it becomes less stressful and frustrating for the teacher. So I don't feel like it's some response to me, personal, right? This is not personal. They're not acting this way in my class, and I'm not getting angry in response. Now all of a sudden I'm empathetic, and I feel like, wow, this is a cry for help, and I really need to do something here. This is a call to me to do something, instead of this is being done to me, and now I take it home and I'm angry and I'm frustrated at home, and I'm, not wanting to deal with that class period that, everybody's got the 7th period, that's like end of the day coming up, and you're not looking forward to dealing with that class because that's your class. And there's so many tools that I think teachers are lacking to be able to address the challenging behaviors in their classroom. And that frustration, because we're not just talking about SEL and Tier 1 things that we need to institute in schools, but are there any supports for Tier 2, Tier 3 in schools that really we're not equipped for? As a first responder, we're not all trained to be first responders. So I may have all those challenges and see that trauma and be faced with it and really not have any tools to handle it or know where to direct somebody that's experiencing something that's happening. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think there's so many interesting ideas that are coming up.
Yeah.
I think going back to one thing you just said about, what we say in our center is that behavior is not emotion. That when someone is yelling and screaming, you may think they're angry, but they may be feeling shame. And so what are the skills that you need to be able to unpack the inner experience of that child? Because another term that we have in our center is you have to name it to tame it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't really know the granularity with which the experience is, so for example, as a kid, I was horrifically bullied. I hated school. I would come, I hate you. I'm never going to school again. And my mother, who was not well regulated, go to your room, wait till your father gets home. Great, can't wait for daddy to come home, right? Daddy would come home, I'd get punished a lot, or I'd get, the belt. And never did they ever find out what was happening to me. So they never learned what was going on in my inner life. And, it could be anything. It could have been fear, it could have been shame, it could have been anxiety. But importantly, every emotion has a different trajectory for regulation. It's not like mindfulness for this and yoga for this and breathing for that. We want the easy way out. And there is no easy way out when it comes to people's inner lives. They're complex. And so the strategies to deal with shame are completely different than the strategies for fear. And the question that I always have is, how much training do our adults have in being able to unpack that emotional life of that child to then support them in evidence-based strategies to help them regulate it? Because we overestimate self-control and self-regulation. In the world, emotions are mostly co-regulated, right? Classrooms are communities, homes are communities. So I have to be the role model as the adult. I have to help to co-regulate the child to then hope that someday that child will be able to co-regulate or self-regulate when they're on their own. That is a lifelong process. I'll stop there.
No, sorry, Laura, go ahead.
So what you said really strikes me, because as a classroom teacher, and it might be where you were going to go, Amy, is you want to create that same co-regulation, that same shared experience on how you can unpack, both as a teacher and as a parent, your emotional regulation, so that it's open enough so that when you're dealing with children or teens in the classroom, that they feel safe to unpack theirs at the same time they're learning. It's a really tricky walk to do.
Well, and also, you don't want to assume that the strategy that works for you will work for them.
That's very true. And so you have to have an openness to know, number one, you can't name it. It looks like anger to me. When it's not anger, it's another emotion that's bringing about the behavior. And so you have to, just like you build family communities and set your boundaries and your regulation and your experiences and your relationship, you do that in the classroom. And so one of the things we've shifted at is making sure that we are developing, as much as we are strategies for learning, as strategies for emotional regulation, if you will. And so how do we do that as a school community, as a classroom? So we do it at the school level and at the classroom level. And how do we make it safe to not label that that's anger or frustration or uncertainty, which might be the same outward face of what you're seeing, and really allow time to be able to label it, both teachers within the school community, students within the classroom community, and have the healthiness to be able to do that at the same time you're trying to meet standards, right? And the state test that's coming down the road, and understand where the learning difficulties are in reading, math, science, or social studies. And so it is a really tricky walk, but unless you deliberately look at what's going on, both from an emotional regulation sense and from a learning sense, the learning's not going to happen in the classroom. Right. It doesn't, and you've seen that, and I see that.
And I think we're dealing with a different time too. So we can all agree that what we're saying today is that teachers need the training for dealing with their own regulation and their own emotions, in the hopes that it'll trickle down, that it'll help enhance the learning, because we're in a time when, I have an 11-year-old who is a lot of times responsible for some of her own academic learning through technology. So we have an opportunity to, while there's the Khan Academies and there's the things where she's teaching herself an instrument by going on YouTube and looking at lessons. So we have an opportunity where students can take on some of that academic work if we can take on teaching. What they won't get from those online learning services is the human side of it. What we need to be embracing and bolstering how they can learn to cope and deal with their inner lives. Jared?
There's an Australian psychologist that came up with the term hudagogy, which is self-directed learning. And I very much appreciate that because educators want to embrace their own learning, but they want to do it in a way where they have more autonomy around it. There are differences between social emotional learning for students and adults. For students, in my mind, there's a developmental sequence that we're following. If we're going to promote empathy, how do we promote empathy if we don't first promote self-reflective practices or help differentiate between what's from the mind and what's from the body? So in my world, developmental ordering of these SELs is highly important. If we want to teach kids to take accountability, there are going to be some steps that they have to go through before that. But adults are a little different in that we've already gone through those stages and we've met some limitations that we haven't navigated. One of the things that we've done at Teacher Coaches, we've created a platform that actually generates revenue for the school district. So there's never an excuse again why a school district can't support their educators. The work is available for the families in the community for free. Because if we don't get the support of families, how are we possibly going to expect teachers to raise children? Remember the John Adams quote, there are two educations, one to teach a child how to make a living and the other to live? Never been more true, but teachers can't do it without the support of families. So that's why I'm excited about the work that we're doing, because it creates an ecosystem. Money comes into the school district, teachers get wellness, parents get support for free, and it creates a community where everybody benefits.
One thing I just want to point out based on our earlier work, our conversation, is it is just so important to understand that it's a different part of our brain that is being utilized when we're doing social and emotional skills development. You can, unfortunately, I don't profess to, this is the way to do it, worksheets are great for doing math problems. They're not great for doing social and emotional skills development because the emotion system is just different. It's a hot system, which means that it's driven by things that occur in the environment, which is why some days we regulate well and some days we don't, because if we're tired, if we're hungry, if we haven't exercised, our resource depletion is higher and our ability to regulate changes. And I always joke that, when you're on vacation, who cares you have emotional intelligence? But it's when someone kicks the sand in your face, right? Then do you have the actual skill to deal with your feelings in that moment? And what we find in our research and with our practices is that people, what they say they will do does not actually occur when they're highly activated. Because the area of your brain that's activated when you're thinking about how you would problem solve and how you would react is not exactly the same as when you're in the emotional situation.
Can I share a quick example of that? We created an escape room for teachers to teach them SEL. And 3 times the instructions were, what is your goal and how are you going to maintain awareness of that goal while you're navigating the escape room? Each time they completely forgot about their goal and they became entirely focused on the outcome, trying to get out of the room. Right?
There you go.
So much, I think, is what is modeled for you in how you can handle a situation. And, I grew up in a house where my mom has been in 40 car accidents.
Wow.
40 car accidents. She's a terrible driver. There's really
Sounds like
nothing
it.
else behind it.
And she's still around.
She's very tiny. She claims she can't see well over the steering wheel. And every time, and my dad is the kind of person that when you spill a glass of water, he will start cursing. Where's the paper towels? He gets very upset about little things. But my mom has always said, whenever I get in a car accident, your dad just says, are you okay? All right, that's fine. Where are you? I'll come get you. Right? So in the big things, my dad's always been very calm. Now, I see that in myself where I have learned, it's okay, it's fine. What do we need to do? But it's really what's modeled for you. Now, I am sure there are a lot of little things that I have big responses to and wish I didn't. But, the same would be true for our students in terms of what's the reaction that they get and that they see exhibited for them when they're put under that kind of stress or pressure? Do they see the teacher when, there's that fire alarm in the middle of the test that's upsetting them. Patrick has always said that our kids have been a great teacher for him in terms of the sleep that you talked about and the eating. You know, it's so clear with babies when they need a nap. It's so clear with babies when they're hungry. Why don't we see that in ourselves? You know, when we are tired and we're hungry, we do the same thing. We might not cry and go boneless on the floor like my kids do, but we kind of have that reaction, and we don't acknowledge that we're experiencing that, and that maybe we needed that nap that we should have taken an earlier bedtime. Maybe it would be a good time to take some questions. I think our panel is terrific, and we also, I know we have Chicago Public School System here too, so they have some great insight as well.
Are we going to the mic?
Yes, if you would. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. This was terrific. I have a question about teacher training.
Yes.
So you've talked a lot about what we should do. What do we need to do in teacher training and in school leadership training programs? Illinois did reform a lot in school leadership training. And so that's question number one. Question number two is, who is doing this research nationally? Is there anybody doing a good job, a College of Education or a teacher training program where we could say, that's what you need to look at? Where's the best practice in teacher and school leadership training?
I'll do the first one.
Okay.
My preference is to create self-reflective practitioners. Teachers don't need more techniques and tools and skills being thrown at them. They need to feel like they're empowered to understand the nature of the issue and to feel supported to be able to consider what their role in it is. If we support the teachers and we provide good theory that grounds the ideas, they'll be able to put that into practice.
I think what you do from a teacher preparation standpoint is model it at the building level. So the building has to, we talked a little bit about, the building has to be open to not just the academics, but the social, emotional, and the behavioral piece. And so what you need to do is make sure that as a system that you take time to recognize that academics, social, emotional learning, behavioral needs are all on a pyramid. And that you're going to make sure that you address the wellness of everyone in that pyramid, and wellness from the sense of making sure everyone's ready to go. And you're going to have some people, teachers, staff, principals, that are on various planes of wellness on a certain day or on a certain year. And so I guess what I would like to say is, when you are a teacher and you learn to be a teacher, a lot of it is about the mechanics of teaching. And we can't forget that what happens is the mechanics of teaching and the mechanics of learning doesn't happen unless the environment that you're doing it in, the classroom or the school, the microcosm or the larger school, unless people are ready and open to learn. And so what students come with, what teachers come with every day when they walk into that school building has got to be acknowledged and recognized as where they are that day. And there's got to be an opportunity at the door of the school, at the door of the classroom, to reconnect every day. And so one of my mentors said, never, 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 as a new teacher, are you at the copier, or are you at the back table trying to set up the science lesson as the kids are coming in? You owe it to yourself to have 15 minutes before the students come in to just get rid of all the mechanics of what's going on that day, to center, to reflect, to go out to the playground, not to monitor, but to high five and greet the students and find the one special student that you want to follow up because there was a problem yesterday, but to be a person. And that's how I always started my day. And it always made it easier because I wasn't caught up in the mechanics of teaching, the mechanics of students learning, but I was caught up in the social, emotional, and I'm not going to call it SEL, the social, emotional relationships that I needed to bridge, build, and compensate for in myself and in my students and in my school building. So to me, that's what we do with first-year teachers. We say you have the mechanics, maybe, but you also say you don't need the mechanics. You need that social, emotional connection within yourself and with your classroom, with your coworkers, and in your building. And if you don't have that, you're not going to teach anything, and no one's going to learn anything because it's going to be based on their day.
I'll just add one point. I'm going to be a little bit brave and say that I think that we need to redo teacher preparation to make sure every teacher is trained in child development. We just are not giving teachers the honor, of their profession, and they deserve to understand how children develop in context and in order to how to differentiate their instruction accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that. I went back, Patrick and I went and spoke at Penn State, and that is where I received my training and got toured through the College of Education by the current dean, and I had not seen, then he separately had someone else tour us through the psychology department, and they had not done anything impressive since I was there to move this forward, and it was so deflating to me because knowing we were coming, you would think they would highlight their best approaches to things that they were doing to move this forward, and it was a completely separate tour, and that was knowing that the Penn State students themselves wanted this, right? That was, he bragged to us about how Penn State students, for the first class ever, had donated the class graduating gift as an endowment for their mental health system instead of an actual thing, right? It wasn't the library, it wasn't trees or benches, it was an endowment for their mental health system on campus, but they hadn't implemented that at all into the College of Education. It was exactly what I experienced. So I think there's a lot of work to do there, and I don't have a great example of a university that is doing that at this time.
I can share that with you afterwards.
Hi, thank you. This is such an important topic. My name is Karen Alexander. I direct a program called Brain Futures, and Amy, we're very fortunate to have her as an advisor. I come from Baltimore, and my kids go to public schools there, and I'm hoping you can speak a bit about trauma-informed practices within this broader context, because we see so many students and also so many teachers who are coming from environments that are really challenging, and the school may be the one safe place that they can all be together. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about that. Thank you.
And Karen's doing great work on highlighting some of the tools that can be used. Maybe.
There's a long line, so I'll try to keep it really brief. Social emotional learning is, I think of as prevention, because trauma can be chronic and it can be acute. Chronic trauma could be ongoing poverty, living in a food desert. Social emotional learning helps build the fortitude to be able to withstand higher and higher levels of distress, so that when a trauma does happen, because we can't judge what a trauma is, it's going to be different for you and I, but as we can raise their capacity for distress, we're going to have a better chance of then implementing some of the other skills to help deal with the aftermath.
So part of our social emotional learning, or social emotional experience at the Bremerton School District is also about learning about trauma-informed care, and also about primary trauma and a lot of times secondary trauma. And you will have educators and people in your building that will be suffering from both primary and secondary trauma, right? And so part of social emotional learning and that frontline type thing is also recognizing and understanding where we are with trauma-informed care, both is primary and serving the needs of our students, and secondary, our own trauma as we navigate what's going on in the school building. And so I don't think you should separate those. I think they can be commingled, and if you're really going to have a strong tier system of support, and it's going to be multi-tiered system of support, you've got to commingle those things and understand that we are all in different all of us every day are in different spots with trauma-informed care. Our students come with what they have at their home and what they have found in their building. I'm not going to say created because the students don't create it. I think we create the trauma in the building as adults. But they come with needs not being met. And so it's how we meet those needs, trauma-informed care and SEL, together commingled so that the students can come ready to learn. And it's that greeting at the door that does it, or the greeting out at the playground that does it. It sets it up.
Hi, I'm thinking about this conversation in the context of higher education. I'm both a university administrator and an adjunct faculty at a different university. And I had a situation where a student approached me because they felt traumatized because one of their fellow classmates had perpetrated a mass shooting. And I had a background in, and I also had someone report a past sexual assault to me. This was all within a year of being an adjunct faculty. I was previously a social worker, and I knew the Illinois state laws about sexual harassment prevention, which I think most adjunct faculty would not have that kind of background and knowledge and resources. So what do you think universities could do to increase the preparation of adjunct faculty especially?
That's not just adjunct, but even, I know Kevin's going to talk a little, but my brother is a crew coach, and he's had, he has a team of 100 kids on his team. 6 have attempted their lives, and it's something new for him that he was not prepared for, and so it's affecting all faculty.
I will just say that the university setting is the hardest to move, whether it be teacher preparation or faculty development. I gave a speech to the medical school where I am a professor, and I got, heckled by a surgery professor who said, this is Yale. We produce Nobel laureates, not nice people. And I was like, where am I? And I'm not joking. So it's a really difficult place to work in terms of transforming, the skills of faculty, because there's no requirements. But yet, we're working on it. Our president, who is my mentor, is determined to make Yale the first emotionally intelligent university. But it's all put on me. So it's hard. It's really hard, and I can empathize because people are suffering.
And there's an emerging crisis in this country in which insurance companies are going to start to stop protecting schools, higher ed and K through 12, because of the lawsuits that are coming about and the big payoffs because of boundary violations. So if we don't start doing more to be preventative, we're going to see schools closing down because of that.
My name's Kevin. Thank you for being here and just working on this critical social issue. We lost a child that was emotionally challenged to suicide a little over 2 years ago, and he was a real high performer, but he battled anxiety and wasn't prepared. I'd like to hear about resiliency and also recovery, where you've seen, one of my mentors has been Molly Marty with the Resiliency Foundation. It started after the loss of an educator who was also a coach out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it had an effect where several athletes under this coach took their life after he committed suicide. Have you studied, resiliency as part of that recovery? And if there's any profession that's about paying forward, it's about education. Developing young minds, paying forward. What is the cost of not contributing to this critical social issue? I'm kind of getting tangent here, but on that resiliency continuum, are you also studying recovery and the cost of not investing in this, and how you can share, along with knowledge and awareness, vigilance on the signs and signals, and what if we don't do this, so we honor those that battled and were not taken care of? Congratulations on your success in working through it. You have a very similar personality to our son, Jack.
Well, I'm very sorry for your loss. One thing that I would just say is that we spend too much time talking about resiliency, and that may be a trigger for some people in the room. Because when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about an individual, and we're failing to recognize that we are built to be in relationship. And it breaks my heart because it's, I work in the toughest districts in the United States, and it's like, teach my kids to be resilient. And it's the wrong mindset. The mindset is that we're all in this together, and that you need me to help you co-regulate, and I need you as much as you need me. And then the second piece of that is that we are biologically different people. Not everyone can develop as much stress tolerance as others. I think there are biological differences in our makeup. And actually what really interesting research shows is that the children who are the most sensitive to stress actually can do better than the kids who are less sensitive to stress if they're in nurturing and supportive environments. So literally that co-regulation and that relationship, right, helps to build people up. So I just think that we've become so Americana in our way of thinking about things, and if we could think more like they do sometimes in other countries about we're in this together, and it's all about us, not about me, or you developing the skills, or you need to have self-control, I think that we could do much better.
I'll just add quickly to that. I really like what you're saying, Mark, which is that most district administrators, district leaders don't necessarily understand what organizational health is. We talk about school culture, but not necessarily how to measure it. Climate, infrastructure, and adaptation are my tenets. And adaptation is how do we respond to threats, both internal and external? How do we make meaning of them? And then what do we do about them? And if we can model that as an organization, we'll be teaching that also to individuals. Thank you for sharing.
I work in healthcare and not in an educational setting, but I think that what you're describing is applicable to all work settings and a corporate America type of setting like I work in. And I'm wondering if you can share any really applicable practices that a group of coworkers can practice together in expressing emotions and allowing expressing emotions to be a normal and accepted part of the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
From a school building, I'm going to speak in the sense of a lot of times we have curriculum where we teach supports for mindfulness and for compassion and for empathy. But we don't do it in a school system where you practice that as a group of educators. You do it in the sense that you're delivering it to students. And I don't think that you can deliver mindfulness, compassion, perseverance, permission to break down and be you, to students if you don't practice that as a community. And so I think that what we need to make sure is that we don't have programs that teachers deliver to students, but that you create the culture and the climate in your building where you're practicing those things and you are practicing it as a school community, and then you deliver it to the students. Am I making sense with that? I think we buy boxed programs, even math, and you teach it, but you don't have the skills to live it. And so what I'm saying is that we need to make sure that whatever initiative we have, that we don't do it to kids and we don't deliver it to kids unless we're modeling it, living and breathing and understanding the implications of it as a group of adults. I don't know if that's resonating, but it's what we try to do in Bremerton. So our CEL initiative isn't about giving CEL to students and making them resilient, empathetic, able to express their emotions, because if the staff isn't doing it, the students aren't going to see it. So you have to be able to do it from the adult to adult, and then the adult to students, and then the students to the adults, is what I'm trying to say.
I would say never label feelings as good or bad, positive or negative. Right. All feelings are valuable. Some are comfortable, some are uncomfortable. It's a good starting point.
I'll add one little thing is I believe we have way too many rules at our schools and not enough feelings. And so I say when we work with schools, we really try to get them to move away from having rules and ask the kids, ask your colleagues, how do you want to feel working in this environment? And learn from them what feelings they're hoping to experience more, and then work together to create an environment where people are experiencing those feelings more.
All right, it's time to wrap, but we only have one question left, so I think we better just...
Hello, I'll try to
Squeeze it
make
in, right?
I'll try to make it quick.
Yeah.
I work in the mental health advocacy space, but I'm speaking as a parent, and I would like to know what is the role of the parent in all of this, or how educators perceive that, because I have a child in middle school who's high performing, but he lives with anxiety and depression, and it's been very challenging to advocate for his rights and protections and discuss it with educators who are not quite sure how this impacts them, even though it impacts his grades or him living his best self or being his best self. So I'm kind of curious how as a parent, you break through that burnout to connect with the teachers to be partners. And
Just to start, I would say, that you're having the conversation with the school is the first most important thing, because I can't tell you how many students were going through something traumatic and I didn't find out about it until after the fact. And it really does change a teacher's response to the student when they know that there is something going on. It makes them so much more compassionate and aware, they're more vigilant. So the very first thing that has to happen is that conversation, as uncomfortable, or even if that teacher doesn't seem receptive, still having the conversation. I had students who had something traumatic happen, and because it was outside of school, maybe the parent didn't see they were still doing well academically, so they didn't see that impact. But knowing that something was happening, I was able to be a little more empathetic, sensitive, see when there was a downtime that I might gloss over with 100 students. You just don't know. Any other thoughts on that?
I would say that what you need to do, and I'm going to put my parent hat on, as a parent, you need to be your child's first advocate, and I mean that truly. So you need to be able to go to the classroom teacher, and if that doesn't work or there's roadblocks, then you go to the counselor, the interventionist, or the principal, or wherever you need to go, and I've done that with my own children, to make sure that I'm that advocate that communicates that. And when I go do that, I make sure that I understand why and how it might be impacting the classroom. And as a parent, I talk about that. This is what has happened, this is what is happening at home or out in the community, and this is the response. As a teacher, I need to be open and honest enough as a school system to recognize the importance of that dialogue and the recognition of where that student and that family is. It can be very hard to do. And as a teaching profession, sometimes we get too busy in the minutia that we don't care about the actual physical being in front of us. And so there are reasons for that. Sometimes it happens as the kids are finally in the classroom that this important discussion needs to happen and it's the wrong time. But so I tell parents when they need to do that, you need to pick the time and place, and you need to make sure that you set aside time, and that you need to be your child's advocate. I'm not flippant when I say that. I mean that wholeheartedly. And I go up the system until, you can't tell I'm a rabble-rouser, but I go up the system until I find that. And I do that with my students too, because my students are my family. But you have to create that environment and that need, because so much is understood as a teacher in the classroom when you know those things are happening. So
I love the question. I think homeschool partnerships is the next frontier, and we can't just expect parents to get involved. It's not going to happen that way. We have to offer them something, and through Teacher Coach, we're offering free health, free wellness. What's anxiety in children? What's depression? What are difficult relation topics? And they'll have it without cost. And now they'll feel supported by the school community, and they'll be more willing to invest themselves because they've gotten something back.
And we've got to unpack those silos. So it's not that I'm at the parent and what happens after 3:15 is my business and what happens before 3:15 is your business. And so it's creating those relationships. And it's through parents, teachers, healthcare providers, mental health professionals, all those people in the community being able to own our kids and be supportive of what's happening with our students and our families, because a lot of times what's happening with the families is also impacting what's happening with the kids, which then impacts what happens in the classroom. So it's creating that community dialogue and getting away from silo dialogue.
So if your school doesn't have it, demand it, right?
You know what?
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. You have to keep pushing until you get it, because it's not going to happen. No, nothing happens without a little demand.
And from a teacher perspective, if as a parent, and I tell this to parents when I talk with parents, you can't, school starts at 9:10 and you as a parent run in with your kid at 9:12 and you're trying to have this dialogue, it's not going to happen. But as a teacher, I need to remember, I need to offer them, not go away, I've got the rest of the class. I've got to give them a piece of paper and say, see me at 3:15, or call me at noon, this is my first break, right? I've got to have those skills, and I've got to open that before the school day and the school year starts. So that's the other piece, is, as parents, sometimes the crisis is now, but you've got to, as a parent and as a teacher, give yourself leeway to find places and time and places to have those conversations.
That's great. Thank you so much, and we
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing you.